The dusty streets of Redemption Creek stretched endlessly under the scorching Arizona sun, where tumbleweeds danced between weathered buildings and the sound of spurs echoed against wooden boardwalks. It was here, in this forgotten corner of the frontier, that Samuel Hayes found himself standing at the altar of the small wooden church, staring at a woman he'd never met before that morning. Her name was Eleanor Whitmore, and she had arrived on the morning stagecoach with nothing but a worn leather satchel and eyes that held secrets deeper than the canyon that split their town in two. Before we continue with Samuel's extraordinary tale, I'd love for you to subscribe to our channel and let us know in the comments what city you're watching from. Your support means the world to us as we bring these incredible frontier stories to life. Samuel had placed the advertisement in the Denver Post 3 months prior, when the loneliness of his ranch had become unbearable, and the weight of managing 2,000 acres alone had nearly broken his spirit. Seeking companionship for life on the frontier must be of good character and willing to embrace the challenges of ranch life. The responses had been few, but Eleanor's letter had stood out, not for what it said, but for what it didn't say. Her handwriting was elegant, educated, yet her words were carefully measured, revealing nothing of her past or her reasons for seeking such an arrangement. Now, as Reverend Morrison spoke the sacred words that would bind them together, Samuel couldn't help but study the woman beside him. She was beautiful in a haunting way, with auburn hair that caught the light streaming through the church's single stained glass window, and skin pale as porcelain, suggesting a life lived far from the harsh frontier sun. Her dress was simple but well-made, speaking of means that didn't quite match her desperate need for a marriage arrangement with a stranger. When she spoke her vows, her voice carried the refined accent of the East Coast, each word carefully pronounced as if she were afraid of revealing too much through her speech. The ceremony was brief, attended only by the Reverend, his wife Martha, and old Pete, who ran the general store. Samuel had no family left. His parents had died in a cholera outbreak 5 years prior, and his younger brother had been killed in a mining accident the previous winter. Eleanor claimed to have no one as well, though something in her eyes suggested this wasn't entirely true. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Samuel leaned in to kiss his new bride, but she turned her head slightly, offering only her cheek. Her skin was cold despite the warm afternoon, and he felt her tremble at his touch. The ride back to the ranch was conducted in near silence, broken only by the creaking of the wagon wheels and the occasional call of a hawk circling overhead. Samuel tried several times to engage Eleanor in conversation, asking about her journey from Denver, her impressions of the territory, anything that might help him understand the woman he'd just married. Her responses were polite but minimal, and she kept her hands folded tightly in her lap, her eyes fixed on the horizon as if she were searching for something or perhaps running from it. The Hayes Ranch sprawled across a valley between two mesas, with the main house sitting on a slight rise that offered views of the surrounding countryside. Samuel had built it himself over the course of 3 years, crafting each room with care and attention to detail that spoke of his hope for a family to fill it someday. The house was larger than most frontier homes, with a wide front porch, 4 bedrooms, and even a small library that he'd stocked with books ordered from back east. As they approached, Eleanor's composure seemed to crack slightly, and Samuel caught her wiping away what might have been a tear. "It's beautiful," she said softly, speaking more words at once than she had all day. You've built something truly special here." Samuel felt a surge of pride and hope. Perhaps this arrangement could work after all. Perhaps they could find happiness together, even if it hadn't begun with love. He helped her down from the wagon, noting again how her hands shook slightly, and how she seemed to flinch at unexpected sounds. The bark of his dog Rex, the slam of the barn door in the wind, the distant lowing of cattle. That evening, Samuel prepared the finest meal he could manage: beef steak from his own cattle, vegetables from the garden he'd carefully tended, and even a bottle of wine he'd been saving for a special occasion. Eleanor picked at her food, complimenting his cooking but eating very little. She asked thoughtful questions about the ranch, the cattle, the challenges of frontier life, but Samuel noticed she deflected every question about herself with practiced ease. As the sun set and painted the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple, the reality of their situation settled over them both. They were married now, bound together by law and custom, yet they remained strangers. Samuel showed Eleanor to the master bedroom, explaining that he'd prepared the guest room for himself until she felt comfortable with their arrangement. She thanked him with genuine gratitude, and for the first time that day, her smile seemed real. "Samuel," she said as he turned to leave, "there are things about me, about my past, that you need to know. Things that might change how you feel about our marriage." He paused in the doorway, studying her face in the lamplight. "Eleanor, we all have pasts. What matters is the future we build together." She shook her head, her composure finally cracking completely. "You don't understand. What I have to tell you, it could put you in danger. It could destroy everything you've built here." Samuel stepped back into the room, closing the door behind him. "Then tell me. Whatever it is, we'll face it together. That's what marriage means, isn't it?" Eleanor moved to the window, staring out at the star-filled sky. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper, but her words would echo in Samuel's mind for the rest of his life. "My real name isn't Eleanor Whitmore. It's Eleanor Cassidy, and my father is Patrick Cassidy." The name hit Samuel like a physical blow. Patrick Cassidy was one of the most notorious outlaws in the territory, a man whose gang had terrorized towns from Colorado to California. The bounty on his head was $5,000, more money than most men saw in a lifetime. Samuel sank into the chair by the window, his mind reeling with the implications. 3 months ago, Eleanor continued, her voice growing stronger as she finally unburdened herself of the secret she'd carried. "I discovered that my father was planning something terrible. Not just another bank robbery or train heist, but something that would result in the deaths of innocent people. I couldn't be part of it anymore. Couldn't pretend that the money he sent me for my education back east wasn't stained with blood." She turned to face him, and Samuel saw tears streaming down her cheeks. "I stole something from him, Samuel. Something that could bring down his entire operation and put him behind bars forever. But it also makes me the most wanted woman in 3 territories. The Pinkerton detectives are looking for me. His own men are hunting me. And everyone in between wants to claim the reward." Samuel's world tilted on its axis. The quiet, refined woman he'd married was the daughter of a killer, a thief herself, and apparently carrying information that could reshape the criminal landscape of the frontier. Yet as he looked at her, really looked at her, he saw not a criminal, but a woman who had risked everything to do what was right. "What did you steal?" he asked quietly. Eleanor reached into her satchel and withdrew a leather-bound ledger, its pages filled with names, dates, and locations written in various hands. This contains the details of every job my father's gang has planned for the next 2 years. Bank schedules, train routes, the names of corrupt officials who help them, safe houses, everything. With this information, the law could stop dozens of robberies and save countless lives. Samuel stared at the ledger, understanding now why Eleanor had seemed so frightened, so constantly alert. She wasn't just running from her past. She was carrying the power to destroy one of the most dangerous criminal organizations in the West. "Why didn't you just turn it over to the authorities?" he asked. "Because I'm not naive," Eleanor replied, her voice hardening. "Half the sheriffs and marshals in this territory are either incompetent or corrupt. If this information falls into the wrong hands, it becomes worthless, and I become a target with no protection. I needed time to figure out who could be trusted, and I needed somewhere safe to hide while I did it." "So you married a stranger and came to the middle of nowhere?" "I married a man whose advertisement spoke of character and integrity, a man who built something beautiful in a harsh land and had the patience to wait for the right woman to share it with." She looked directly into his eyes. "I researched you, Samuel Hayes. I know about your parents, your brother, your reputation in town. I know you've never been in trouble with the law, that you pay your debts, that you helped rebuild the church after the fire last year without asking for recognition." Samuel felt a strange mixture of flattery and violation. "You investigated me." "I had to. My life depended on choosing the right man." Eleanor's voice softened, but what I didn't expect was to find someone I could actually care about, someone I could see myself building a real life with, if circumstances were different. The weight of her confession settled over them both. Samuel understood now that their marriage wasn't just a frontier arrangement. It was a desperate gambit by a woman trying to survive while doing the right thing. The question was, what would he do with this knowledge? Outside, a coyote howled in the distance, and Eleanor flinched at the sound. Samuel realized that every noise, every unexpected movement, must remind her that danger could be lurking anywhere. She'd been living in fear for months, and now she'd placed that burden on his shoulders as well. "Eleanor," he said finally, "or should I call you by your real name?" "Eleanor is real. It's my middle name, and Whitmore was my mother's maiden name. I've never lied to you about who I am, only about who my father is." Samuel nodded, appreciating the distinction. "Eleanor, then, what you've told me doesn't change the vows we made today. For better or worse, remember? I'd say this qualifies as worse." A sob escaped her lips, and she covered her face with her hands. "You don't understand what you're saying. If they find me here, they'll kill you too. They'll burn down everything you've built. I've brought a war to your doorstep." Samuel stood and moved to her side, gently taking her hands in his. "Then we better make sure we're ready for it." The next morning brought news that would test their resolve sooner than either had expected. Samuel was in the barn tending to his horses when he heard the thunder of approaching hoofbeats. Through the barn door, he saw a cloud of dust on the horizon. Riders, at least 6 of them, coming fast toward the ranch. Eleanor appeared at his side, having heard the sound from the house. Her face had gone pale, and her hand instinctively moved to the small pistol she'd revealed she carried. "They've found me," she whispered. But as the riders drew closer, Samuel recognized the lead horse and its rider. "It's Sheriff Morrison and a posse," he said, relief evident in his voice. "They're not outlaws." Eleanor's relief was short-lived. That might be worse. If there's a reward posted for me, even honest lawmen might be tempted. Sheriff Morrison was a good man, one of the few truly incorruptible lawmen in the territory. But Samuel knew Eleanor was right to be cautious. $5,000 was more than the sheriff made in 5 years, and he had a family to think about. The posse rode into the yard, their horses lathered with sweat and their faces grim. Sheriff Morrison dismounted and approached Samuel with the weariness of a man who'd been riding hard for days. "Samuel," the sheriff said, touching the brim of his hat in greeting. "Heard you got married yesterday. Congratulations." "Thank you, Sheriff. What brings you out this way?" Morrison's eyes moved to Eleanor, who stood slightly behind Samuel. Her composure carefully maintained, despite the fear Samuel could sense radiating from her. "We're tracking some dangerous individuals. Patrick Cassidy's gang hit the bank in Silver Creek 3 days ago. Killed 2 people, including a child. We have reason to believe they might be heading this direction." Samuel felt Eleanor's hand grip his arm, her nails digging into his flesh through his shirt. "Any particular reason you think they'd come through here?" he asked, keeping his voice steady. "Cassidy's daughter has gone missing," Morrison continued, his gaze never leaving Eleanor's face. "Word is she stole something valuable from her father, and he's tearing up the territory looking for her. We think she might be the key to bringing down his whole operation." The moment stretched taut as a bowstring. Samuel could feel Eleanor trembling beside him, could sense the sheriff's growing suspicion as he studied her face. The other members of the posse had spread out slightly, their hands resting casually on their weapons. "Sheriff," Samuel said carefully, "I'd like you to meet my wife, Eleanor. Eleanor, this is Sheriff Morrison." Eleanor stepped forward with remarkable composure, extending her hand to the sheriff. "Pleased to meet you, Sheriff Morrison. Samuel has spoken of you often." Morrison took her hand, but Samuel noticed how his eyes narrowed slightly as he studied her features. "Ma'am, forgive me for asking, but you wouldn't happen to have seen any strangers in the area recently? A young woman traveling alone, perhaps?" "I'm afraid not, Sheriff," Eleanor replied smoothly. "Though I've only been here since yesterday. I came in on the morning stage from Denver for our wedding." It wasn't technically a lie, but Samuel could see the sheriff processing the information, weighing it against whatever description he might have of Eleanor Cassidy. The tension in the yard was palpable, and Samuel knew that the next few moments would determine their fate. "Well," Morrison said finally, "if you do see anything suspicious, you'll let us know immediately. Cassidy's gang is extremely dangerous, and his daughter might be just as deadly. There's a $5,000 reward for information leading to her capture." "Of course, Sheriff," Samuel replied. "We'll keep our eyes open." As the posse prepared to leave, Morrison paused and looked back at Eleanor. "Ma'am, you remind me of someone. Can't quite place it, but the resemblance is striking." Eleanor's smile never wavered. "I have one of those faces, I suppose. People are always telling me I look like someone they know." Morrison nodded slowly, then mounted his horse. "Samuel, you take care of that new wife of yours. These are dangerous times, and a man needs to protect what's his." As the posse rode away, Samuel and Eleanor stood in the yard until the dust cloud disappeared over the horizon. Only then did Eleanor's composure finally crack, and she sank to her knees in the dirt, her whole body shaking with the aftermath of terror and adrenaline. Samuel knelt beside her, pulling her into his arms. "It's all right," he murmured. "They're gone." "For now," Eleanor whispered against his chest. But Morrison suspected something. I could see it in his eyes. "It's only a matter of time before he puts the pieces together." Samuel helped her to her feet and led her back to the house. As they sat at the kitchen table, He studied the woman he'd married, really studied her for the first time. Beneath the fear and exhaustion, he saw strength, intelligence, and a moral courage that had led her to risk everything to do what was right. "Eleanor," he said quietly, "what if we didn't wait for them to find us? What if we took the fight to them instead?" She looked up at him, confusion evident in her eyes. "What do you mean?" "That ledger you have, it's not just evidence of future crimes. It's a roadmap to stopping them. What if we used it, not just to bring down your father's gang, but to do it in a way that keeps you safe?" Eleanor shook her head. "Samuel, you don't understand what you're suggesting. These aren't just common criminals. My father's gang includes some of the most dangerous men in the West. They've killed dozens of people, and they won't hesitate to kill dozens more to protect themselves." "Then we make sure we're not fighting them alone," Samuel replied. "There are good men in this territory, honest lawmen and citizens who are tired of living in fear. What if we could unite them, give them the information they need to coordinate a strike that would cripple the gang all at once?" Eleanor stared at him as if seeing him for the first time. "You're talking about organizing a war. I'm talking about ending one," Samuel corrected. "Your father's gang has been terrorizing this territory for years. How many more innocent people have to die before someone stands up to them?" Eleanor was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing patterns on the wooden table. When she spoke, her voice was thoughtful. "There's something else in that ledger, something I haven't told you about. My father isn't just planning robberies. He's planning to take over entire towns, install his own people as sheriffs and mayors, create a criminal empire that spans 3 territories." Samuel felt a chill run down his spine. How close is he to succeeding? Closer than anyone realizes. He already has corrupt officials in place in 6 towns. And he's been systematically eliminating or intimidating anyone who might oppose him. Within a year, he could control everything from here to the Colorado border. The magnitude of what Eleanor was describing began to sink in. This wasn't just about stopping a gang of outlaws. It was about preventing the complete corruption of law and order across a vast swath of the frontier. "Then we don't have a choice," Samuel said firmly. "We have to stop him, whatever the cost." Eleanor reached across the table and took his hand. "Samuel, if we do this, there's no going back. Win or lose, our lives will never be the same. Are you prepared for that?" Samuel looked into her eyes and saw not just fear, but hope, perhaps the first real hope she'd felt in months. "Eleanor, when I placed that advertisement looking for a wife, I was looking for someone to share my life with. I never imagined I'd find someone worth dying for." Tears spilled down Eleanor's cheeks, but for the first time since he'd met her, they seemed to be tears of relief rather than fear. "Then we'd better make sure we don't die," she said with a shaky laugh. That night, they spread the contents of Eleanor's ledger across Samuel's kitchen table and began to plan. The information was even more comprehensive than Samuel had imagined. Detailed maps of planned robbery routes, schedules of bank shipments, the names and locations of corrupt officials, safe houses, supply caches, and most importantly, the locations where the gang would be gathering for their next major operation. Here, Eleanor pointed to a notation in her father's handwriting. 3 weeks from now, the entire gang is supposed to meet at Devil's Canyon for what he calls the Big Push. According to this, they're planning to hit 5 banks simultaneously across 3 towns, then use the chaos to install their people in positions of power. Samuel studied the map, his mind racing with possibilities. Devil's Canyon was a natural fortress, nearly impossible to approach without being seen, but it was also a trap if someone could block the exits. "How many men are we talking about?" he asked. "At least 30, maybe more. And these aren't just common outlaws. They're experienced killers, many of them veterans of the war who turned to crime when they couldn't adjust to peace." Samuel nodded grimly. Taking on such a force would require careful planning and significant manpower. But as he studied the ledger, he began to see opportunities. The gang's strength, their coordination and planning, could also be their weakness if someone could anticipate their moves. Over the next several days, Samuel began reaching out to trusted friends and allies throughout the territory. He started with men he knew personally, ranchers who had lost cattle to rustlers, merchants who had been robbed, families who had lost loved ones to the gang's violence. To each, he told a carefully crafted version of the truth, that he had come into possession of information that could help bring Patrick Cassidy to justice, but that he needed their help to act on it. The response was overwhelming. Samuel had underestimated how much fear and anger the gang had generated throughout the territory. Men who had never met began arriving at his ranch, drawn by word-of-mouth reports that someone was finally ready to take action against the outlaws. Eleanor proved invaluable in these preparations. Her knowledge of the gang's operations, combined with her education and intelligence, allowed her to help plan strategies that took advantage of every weakness in her father's organization. She also revealed that she was far from helpless. Her father had insisted she learn to shoot and ride as well as any man, skills that would prove crucial in the days to come. As the date of the planned confrontation approached, Samuel found himself leading a force of nearly 50 men, ranchers, merchants, former soldiers, and even a few reformed outlaws who wanted a chance at redemption. Sheriff Morrison had initially been skeptical of Samuel's claims, but when Eleanor finally revealed her true identity and showed him the ledger, the sheriff became one of their most valuable allies. "I should arrest you," Morrison told Eleanor during one of their planning sessions. "There's still a reward on your head." "And you still could," Eleanor replied calmly. "But then you'd lose the best chance you'll ever have to end Patrick Cassidy's reign of terror." Morrison studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "After this is over, we'll figure out how to handle the legal complications. For now, you're under my protection as a material witness." The plan they developed was ambitious and dangerous. Using the information in Eleanor's ledger, they would position men at strategic points throughout Devil's Canyon, cutting off all escape routes before the gang realized they were trapped. Meanwhile, a smaller force would infiltrate the canyon and attempt to capture or kill Patrick Cassidy himself, hoping that removing the leader would cause the rest of the gang to surrender. Samuel insisted on being part of the infiltration team, despite Eleanor's protests. "This is my fight now too," he told her. "I won't ask other men to take risks I'm not willing to take myself." The night before the operation, Samuel and Eleanor sat on the porch of their ranch house, looking out at the stars that seemed to stretch endlessly across the desert sky. It might be the last peaceful moment they would ever share, and both of them knew it. "Samuel," Eleanor said quietly, "whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know that these past few weeks have been the happiest of my life. For the first time since I was a child, I felt like I had a real home." Samuel took her hand, marveling at how much had changed since that awkward wedding ceremony just a month ago. "Eleanor, when this is over, when we've won, what do you want to do? Where do you want to go?" She smiled, and in the moonlight, she looked younger than her years. "I want to stay right here. I want to help you build something beautiful on this land." I want to raise children who will never have to be afraid of men like my father. Then that's what we'll do, Samuel promised. We'll build a life worth fighting for. The attack on Devil's Canyon began at dawn, with Samuel's forces moving into position under cover of darkness. The canyon was exactly as Eleanor had described, a natural amphitheater surrounded by high walls, with only 3 narrow exits that could be easily defended or blocked. Samuel, Eleanor, and Sheriff Morrison led a team of 12 men down the main trail into the canyon, while the other forces took positions at the exits and on the rim above. The plan was to get as close as possible to the gang's camp before being detected, then use the element of surprise to their advantage. As they crept through the pre-dawn darkness, Samuel could hear the sounds of the outlaw camp. Men talking around campfires, horses nickering, the clink of metal on metal as weapons were cleaned and prepared. According to Eleanor's intelligence, the gang was planning to leave the canyon that morning to begin their coordinated attacks on the 5 target towns. There, Eleanor whispered, pointing to a large tent near the center of the camp. That's my father's tent. If we can take him alive, the others might surrender without a fight. Samuel nodded, though he doubted it would be that simple. Men like Patrick Cassidy didn't build criminal empires by surrendering easily, and his followers were likely to fight to the death rather than face the hangman's noose. As the first light of dawn began to creep over the canyon walls, Samuel gave the signal to attack. The sound of gunfire erupted from multiple directions as his forces opened fire on the outlaw camp. The gang members, caught completely by surprise, scrambled for weapons and cover, but they were trapped in the bottom of the canyon with nowhere to run. Samuel and his team fought their way toward Patrick Cassidy's tent, but the outlaw leader was already awake and armed. As Samuel burst through the tent flap, he found himself face to face with a man who looked remarkably like Eleanor. The same auburn hair, the same intelligent eyes, but twisted by years of violence and greed. "So you're the fool who married my daughter," Cassidy snarled, raising his pistol. "I should thank you for keeping her safe for me." "She's not your daughter anymore," Samuel replied, his own weapon trained on the outlaw. "She's my wife, and she's chosen her side." Cassidy laughed, a sound devoid of warmth or humor. "You think you can turn her against her own blood? You think your little ranch and your simple life can compete with what I've given her?" "What you've given her is a lifetime of fear and shame," Samuel shot back. "What I've given her is a chance at redemption." The standoff might have continued indefinitely, but Eleanor herself ended it by stepping into the tent behind Samuel, her own pistol drawn and aimed at her father's heart. "Hello, Father," she said quietly. "It's time to pay for what you've done." Patrick Cassidy's face went through a range of emotions: surprise, anger, and finally something that might have been pride. "There's my girl," he said softly. "I always knew you had the steel to do what needed to be done." "What needs to be done," Eleanor replied, her voice steady, despite the tears streaming down her face, "is stopping you before you destroy any more lives." "You're making a mistake, Eleanor," Cassidy said, his voice taking on a pleading tone. "Everything I've done for you. To build something that would last, something that would give you power and security." "You've built nothing but misery and death," Eleanor replied, "and I won't be part of it anymore." The sound of gunfire outside was beginning to diminish as Samuel's forces gained control of the canyon. Cassidy seemed to realize that his empire was crumbling around him, and his expression hardened into the cold mask of a killer. "If I can't have you as a daughter," he said, "then I'll settle for revenge." He swung his pistol toward Samuel, but Eleanor was faster. Her shot took her father in the chest, spinning him around and sending him crashing to the ground. As Samuel knelt beside the dying outlaw, Cassidy grabbed his shirt with a blood-stained hand. "You think you've won?" he gasped. "But there are others, men who will come for her, who will never stop hunting her. You've signed both your death warrants." With those words, Patrick Cassidy died, and with him, the criminal empire he had spent years building. The remaining gang members, leaderless and trapped, began surrendering one by one as Samuel's forces closed in. The aftermath of the battle was both triumphant and sobering. Nearly half of Cassidy's gang had been killed or captured, and the information in Eleanor's ledger led to the arrest of corrupt officials throughout the territory. The threat that had terrorized the frontier for years was finally ended, but the cost had been high. Several of Samuel's allies had been killed or wounded in the fighting. Eleanor stood over her father's body for a long time, saying nothing. When Samuel finally approached her, she looked up at him with eyes that held both grief and relief. "It's over," she said simply. "Yes," Samuel replied, taking her in his arms. "It's over." But even as they held each other in the ruins of the outlaw camp, both of them knew that Cassidy's final words carried a grain of truth. There would always be others, men who had worked with the gang, enemies who blamed Eleanor for their losses, bounty hunters who didn't care that the reward had been withdrawn. Their victory had come at the cost of a lifetime of looking over their shoulders. In the weeks that followed, Samuel and Eleanor worked with Sheriff Morrison and federal marshals to round up the remaining members of Cassidy's network. Eleanor's testimony and the evidence in her ledger proved invaluable in these efforts, and gradually, the territory began to return to something resembling normal life. The legal complications surrounding Eleanor's status were eventually resolved when a federal judge ruled that her cooperation in bringing down the gang constituted sufficient restitution for her past involvement. The reward on her head was officially withdrawn, and she was granted a full pardon in exchange for her continued cooperation with law enforcement. As autumn arrived in Arizona, Samuel and Eleanor finally had the chance to focus on building the life they had dreamed of during those dangerous weeks of planning and preparation. The ranch prospered under their joint management, with Eleanor's education and business sense complementing Samuel's practical knowledge of ranching and farming. They were married again in a proper ceremony, this time with the entire town of Redemption Creek in attendance. Sheriff Morrison gave Eleanor away, and even some of the men who had fought alongside them in Devil's Canyon came to witness their union. It was a celebration not just of their love, but of the community they had helped to save. On their wedding night, their real wedding night, Eleanor and Samuel sat on the porch of their ranch house, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant shades of gold and crimson. The ledger that had once contained the secrets of a criminal empire now held the records of their growing ranch, filled with notes about cattle breeding, crop rotation, and plans for expansion. "Do you ever regret it?" Eleanor asked, her head resting on Samuel's shoulder. "Taking on my fight? Risking everything you'd built?" Samuel considered the question seriously. The past few months had been the most dangerous and challenging of his life, but they had also been the most meaningful. He had found not just a wife, but a true partner, someone who shared his values and his vision for the future. "Never," he said finally. "You didn't just bring danger into my life, Eleanor. You brought purpose. Before you came, I was just surviving, going through the motions of living. Now, I feel like I'm truly alive." Eleanor smiled and snuggled closer to him. "I love you, Samuel Hayes. And I love you, Eleanor Hayes." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, they talked about their plans for the future, the children they hoped to have, the improvements they wanted to make to the ranch, the community they wanted to help build. The dangers they had faced and forged them into something stronger than either could have been alone. In the distance, a coyote howled, but Eleanor no longer flinched at the sound. The fear that had haunted her for so long had finally been replaced by hope, and the future stretched before them like an uncharted territory waiting to be explored. Their story had begun with a desperate gamble, a marriage between strangers that neither had expected to last. But it had become something neither had dared to dream of, a love story forged in fire, tested by danger, and strengthened by shared purpose. In a land where survival often meant compromise and moral ambiguity, they had found a way to build something pure and lasting. As they sat together under the vast Arizona sky, Samuel and Eleanor knew that whatever challenges the future might bring, they would face them together. They had already survived the worst that the frontier could throw at them, and they had emerged not just victorious, but transformed. The quiet stranger who had stepped off the morning stagecoach had indeed changed Samuel's destiny forever, not through the confession she had feared would destroy him, but through the courage and love she had shown in the face of impossible odds. And in saving her, Samuel had discovered that he had saved himself as well, finding in their unlikely union the purpose and meaning that had been missing from his life. Their ranch would grow and prosper in the years to come, becoming one of the most successful in the territory. Their children would grow up hearing the story of how their parents had met and fallen in love, while fighting to bring justice to a lawless land. And the town of Redemption Creek would remember them as the couple who had risked everything to make their community safe for future generations. But on that perfect autumn evening, as they sat together on their porch, watching the stars emerge one by one in the clear desert sky, Samuel and Eleanor were content to simply be together, knowing that they had found in each other something worth fighting for, something worth dying for, and most importantly, something worth living for. The frontier had tested them in ways they never could have imagined, but it had also given them the greatest gift of all, a love that was strong enough to overcome any obstacle, deep enough to heal any wound, and enduring enough to last a lifetime. In a land where so many stories ended in tragedy, theirs had become a testament to the power of hope, courage, and the unbreakable bonds that can form between two people willing to fight for what they believe in. As the night deepened around them, Samuel and Eleanor Hayes looked toward the future with confidence and joy, knowing that whatever tomorrow might bring, they would face it together, as partners, as lovers, and as two souls who had found their destiny in each other's arms.